Hi everybody, it's Litsoc Thursday and we are celebrating International Women's Day, which was yesterday.
Yes.
And we've been thinking about it in assemblies, and so we thought we'd pull off things out of the shelf and explore female characters and plots, and the, how do you say it? Is it?
I don't know. Miss Rio, have you got...
Miss Rio, how do you say this word?
I think it's Bechdel.
Bechdel.
Where's the
Bechdel
sheet?
Test. Is there a sheet?
There it is.
Okay. So, and Miss Rio should be reading this, but because it was her idea. But it's and this is usually I expect most of our viewers know this, and perhaps some of you all do as well. Applied to film, but obviously it can go with books, which obviously supply the ideas behind films. The usual criteria of the Bechdel test are: 1, that at least 2 women are featured; 2, that these women talk to each other; 3, that they discuss something other than a man. Okay? Now, it's quite tricky trying to think of books off the top of your head, because so many books interact, don't they? Men, women, and so many books written about women are, even if they're murder mysteries or thinking about their lives, quite often they think about in relation to fathers, brothers, or lovers, or husbands, or potential husbands. So we've just spent a little bit of time exploring whether the most famous female author on the planet, Ms. Austen, we could think of one book, or certainly some books, where there's no conversation about men. Well, I guess there are conversations that do happen. There is Northanger Abbey, where Catherine talks to Isabella about their reading, but during the rest of the book, certainly they're talking about men and their relation to men.
If you think of the most famous, let's go to Pride and Prejudice.
Pride and Prejudice.
Most obvious, when the sisters, when Lizzie and Jane are talking together, and that makes up quite a bit of the action.
It does.
There probably isn't a single conversation on the page where they don't at least mention Mr. Darcy,
Mr. Bingley,
Mr.
or
Bingley
Mr. Darcy.
Once, or Mr. Collins, or any man,
Collins.
or their dad.
Yes.
You know, so it's
because it's such a big part.
Yeah.
Wasn't it such a big part of women's lives? Because women of a certain class, certainly the sort that novels were originally written about, couldn't go out to work, could they? They could not. If they were really hard down on their luck, they might become teachers or governesses. As in the Jill Hornby's new book, Godmersham Park, which imagines Anne Sharp, the governess of Edward's family, particularly Fanny, and what happens to her there. It's fiction, but it's based on real life, and that was a job that she did for the rest of her life. And very important, she became a great friend of Jane Austen's as well, in the short time that she was at the park. But that was it, really. That was all you could do. You could be a housekeeper, but that again was a servant class more than anything else. So you had to marry if you were going to survive, or become a courtesan in the respectable parlance. Which is something else again. Anyway, so we have a series of texts on the table as ever. We're all going to, I hope, going to talk about different books. Has anybody read The Help? Rosie?
Or heard of it, at least.
Or heard of it? There's a film? No? No? Okay. Miss Rio thought of this, didn't you?
Yeah.
Did you think of it as well?
No, Miss Rio did.
Miss Rio did. Because this is the story of Skeeter. She's just returned home with a degree from Mississippi University, but it's also told from the point of view, and she gets to know her black maids really well. And there are conversations in this book which have nothing to do with men at all. They're all about the relationships between the black maids and their charges, their families they look after. If you haven't read it or seen the film, it is it's very funny, and it's very telling about the life of the black servant class in the American South, really from, I suppose, the early 20th century to even perhaps today. But just in that sort of cusp as things were changing, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So I'll kick off with my choice, which Mr. Humphrey suggested me, which is Jane Eyre.
Last minute, this suggestion.
It's last minute. Yes,
go,
last minute. Jane, of course, is she's an orphan. Do we know the story? Yes?
Yeah, I think Hannah
Josie?
and Josie.
Sort of, yeah. Girls, do you know the story?
I'm sure you've heard of Jane Eyre.
You heard of Jane Eyre?
But not familiar with the story.
Not familiar with the story. Okay, all right. Well, it's by Charlotte Bronte, who lived with her sisters and brother up in Haworth in Yorkshire, and they had to go and become governesses. They went abroad, or for school, and then they basically the only way they could make money was to be governesses. Didn't go terribly well, but so eventually they decided they were going to write novels. They read a lot. They'd had major imaginations, and so Charlotte wrote Jane Eyre. That's her most famous book. Emily wrote Wuthering Heights. Have you heard of that? Yeah? No? Great Gothic novel. Great love story, for some people anyway. And Anne wrote The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. They were extraordinary. There's no getting away from it. All in the north of Yorkshire, in a beautiful place near the moors. Now, Jane Eyre is building on Charlotte's experience of being a teacher. And Jane Eyre is an orphan. Her parents have died, and she's been adopted by her aunt, Aunt Reed, who is pretty horrific. She's horrible to her. She's sent away to school. She gets a good education, and then she becomes a governess to the ward, or what else would you call it?
I think ward is.
Yeah,
is
ward.
as good a term as
Mr.
any.
Rochester, who is the owner of this house called Thornfield, looks after he has an adopted sort of daughter called Adele, and Adele had a French mother, so Jane basically has to look after Adele she spends I suppose about 6 months at Thornfield before Mr. Rochester comes home. He's been abroad. So they have a conversation, and Adele is, as you might have realised from the name, French. So here is an example of a conversation they have. You have to excuse my French accent. Okay.
Advance warning.
Now, Jane has governesses had to have accomplishments. They had to be able to draw. They had to be able to speak a language. They had to be able to educate their children in lots of different things. It's not like they had one specialist subject. So Fortunately, I had had the advantage of being taught French by a French lady, and as I had always made a point of conversing with Madame Perrot as often I could, and had besides during the last 7 years learned a portion of French by heart daily, applying myself to take pains with my accent, and imitating as closely as possible the pronunciation of my teacher, I had acquired a certain degree of readiness and correctness in the language, and was not like to be much at a loss with Mademoiselle Adela, because Adele or Adela is very young, so Jane feels that her vocabulary is going to be on a par with hers. So here they are with their first lesson. She examined me some 10 minutes with her large hazel eyes. She suddenly commenced chattering fluently. "Ah!" cried she in French. This is in English. "You speak my language as well as Mr. Rochester does. I can talk to you as I can to him, and so can Sophie. She will be glad. Nobody here understands her. Madame Fairfax is all English. Sophie is my nurse. She came with me over the sea in a great ship with a chimney that smoked. How it did smoke! And I was sick. And so was Sophie, and so was Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester lay down on a sofa in a pretty room called the salon, and Sophie and I had little beds in another place. I nearly fell out of mine. It was like a shelf. And Mademoiselle, what is your name?" So we get the idea that Adele, of course, is young and much more interested in her story before she wants to know about...
Mr. Rochester was mentioned a few times.
Yes.
Fail.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
No, absolutely. Jane Eyre. Bah, I cannot say it. Well, our ship stopped in the morning, before it was quite daylight, at a great city, a huge city with very dark houses and all smoky. Not at all like the pretty clean town I came from. And Mr. Rochester carried me in his arms over a plank to the land, and Sophie came after, and we all got into a coach, which took us to a beautiful large house, larger than this and finer, called an hotel. We stayed there nearly a week. I and Sophie used to walk every day in a great green place full of trees called the park, and there were many children there beside me, and a pond with beautiful birds in it that I fed with crumbs. "Can you understand her when she runs on so fast?" asked Mrs. Fairfax. I understood her very well, for I had been accustomed to the fluent tongue of Madame Perrot. "I wish," continued the good lady, "you would ask her a question or two about her parents. I wonder if she remembers them." And so we learn the history of Adele, and what Adele can remember. And it tells Jane quite a bit about her employer, and what sort of things Adele has been exposed to as with her mother, who we never learn the name of. But she's given her a talent to dance. She's able to tell stories. She can play a little bit of piano. But Jane, who's quite a strict teacher, says that she's disinclined to apply. And it is when Mr. Rochester comes back that they begin talking about Adele, and then Mr. Rochester becomes intrigued as to how this very interesting, feisty and independent-minded woman has come to his house. And so we hear the story of Jane, her relationship with Mr. Rochester, but there are conversations with other women in this story as well.
Yeah.
Besides a great secret at the heart of Thornfield.
Oh yes, let's not forget that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we mentioned as well when we came to Picnicsburg earlier on in the story, when she's still a child and she gets sent to school, she meets Helen Burns, who's a very formative
Yes,
influence
sorry, I've forgotten
on
about
her
Helen
life.
Burns.
And in that scene, I don't think, hopefully, there is no mention of Mr. Rochester.
No,
there
no
will be
mention
an
of Mr.
mention,
Rochester
but also no
whatsoever.
men whatsoever. So
That's right.
So there you go. So there's an example, because sorry,
Yes.
I was being very harsh there. I'm going, you mentioned Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester.
Sorry.
But I mean, ultimately, the story of Mr.
But the
Rochester
story
very
is
important. So-
yes. She makes a great friend who sadly does not survive.
sadly. Spoilers.
But she does remember her really well,
Yeah.
doesn't she?
Big formative influence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because obviously,
Sorry.
yeah, no. Because obviously, when she was before Helen Burns, she hadn't experienced any tenderness or affection, and she gets that from Helen Burns.
She does.
So.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're soulmates in a way, aren't they? Really, early on. Yeah.
So a very important character.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's what qualifies Jane Eyre for
Bechdel.
passing the
Just
Bechdel.
marks through, yeah.
Yeah.
Bechdel test.
Absolutely.
So there you go.
Okay, right, Miss Rio, you want to have?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So folks, if you can think of any, because we're going to start going around the table.
Yeah, they did.
You
come up
got
with
a couple?
few.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
Good.
You have to be able to
That's just.
You can be surprised sometimes.
Oh yes.
Okay, this is actually quite similar to Jane Eyre, this book. We don't have it here. It's a book called The 13th Tale. Have you heard of it? No? It got quite popular for a while. They made a film of it. But basically, it's about this woman called Vida Winter, and she is a famous writer, but no one knows anything about her history, her life. She's like a real mystery, but she's very, very renowned when this is set. I think it's modern day. And she is essentially on her deathbed at the time of the story, and a investigative journalist goes in to talk to her, and she finally reveals all of her secrets. And so the main crux of the story is these two women interviewing each other, and she's asking her all about her past. And it turns out this woman, Vida, the author, has a very strange upbringing that really didn't involve men basically at all, and she lived with her twin sister. Basically, they just kind of ran untamed in this big old country house where their parents were nowhere to be found. And so most of the time it's these two women talking to each other about her upbringing with her twin sister. So the crux of the story is female relationships.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Very
much so.
There are men in the story, but
I think that's the case for
kind
all
of
these.
yeah. You
But-
can't. There's not going to not. But and there are moments where they talk to each other, but most of the time it's just these. Yeah, they're just talking to each other about her upbringing and how much her sister played a part in that, and how strange her upbringing was. It's really good. It's got these kind of Jane Eyre hints to it, but yeah, the big house is just it's kind of an interesting character in itself. It's basically just this huge thing, like Ham House sized house, that there's these two twins, there's a cook, and there's like a gardener, and they're the only people that live in there, and the two girls just run completely amok. They just aren't educated, they just can do whatever they want, and half of the rooms are unused, and they're just kind of like an apocalypse movie. She describes it how all the trees are just growing into the house, and you just get this really like
It's very gothic.
very gothic.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's lots of secrets, and the two women, they sort of have parallels to their backgrounds, and yeah, there's a big twist at the end, which I recommend reading the whole book just for that twist at the end. It's really good. So yeah, that's the one I could think of in terms of, and it's interesting. It's older women as well. It's not, because often I think a lot of these it's younger girls,
Much younger women.
because
yes.
obviously at
Yeah.
certain points of your life, a man would have, boys and men won't get involved unless it's a parent. In terms of these older books, it's all about marriage and
Yes.
things like that, which when you're like at the beginning of Jane Eyre, she's 11, or isn't she, when she's with something like that, so it's not going to be involved in her life. So I think it's interesting that it manages to do that without talking about marriage and that kind of even fatherly relationships, because her father's not really a part of it. So yeah, that's one I can think of. It's really good. I recommend it. But yeah,
And there's a film as well.
there is a film. Yeah, it's got Olivia Colman in it.
Oh,
Yeah,
lovely.
and who's the woman that does the voiceover for Call the Midwife?
Oh, Jenny Agutter.
Yeah, I think she's in it.
Okay.
I think it's her.
No,
Or is it Red?
Jenny Agutter? Yes, I think it is, isn't it? Because she's the older.
Or is it Vanessa
Jenny
Redgrave?
Agutter? No, Vanessa Redgrave. Sorry.
It's her.
Vanessa
She's in
Redgrave.
it.
Vanessa
I always
Vanessa
get.
Redgrave.
Yeah, so it's got some big names in it, but
Very
it's
much so,
it's
yeah.
really good. I'd recommend it. I think it's on Prime if you just wanted to watch the movie. But if you want a story that's just about women talking to each other about other girls and being
Other
younger,
women.
other women, it's a good one.
Pass the test.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was trying to think of... There was another one that came to my mind when you were talking a second ago, but I can't think of it now.
Well, you're the one who suggested this one.
I was, but I was thinking, does Rebecca pass it, do you think? Because there's times when the main character, is talking to...
About Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Talking about Rebecca.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah,
she's
having
talking
thought
to...
that,
What's her
yes.
name? The
Mrs. Danvers.
Mrs. Yeah.
Yes.
And he doesn't really... So that probably is one.
Mm.
I mean, it doesn't happen often, but... Yeah,
Yes,
I was
I
just
see
thinking
how
about
we have
that.
to rack our brains.
I know. You can just think of like snippets of moments where it happens, but that's why I thought about this one, because the whole story is built off of
That's
that
a good
relationship as opposed to
one. It's a very good example.
yeah,
Definitely one of the best.
similar to The Help actually, not massively different in terms of that kind of conversation. Yeah, there's no others I can think of.
No, well done, Miss Rio. That's good, though.
That's all that's come to
Good
my mind.
effort. Thank you.
Who wants to go next?
Who's
Anyone
got
else
one?
have
Who's
fun?
got one?
You girls had a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so mine's not
Come-
very
come-
Annabelle, come on.
and sit
come
on
on.
the chair.
Okay, so mine's not very good.
Why'd you say that? Don't do yourself down before you've even started.
Okay, so mine you wouldn't really think of. So it's One of Us is Lying.
What does that for the game?
You wouldn't really think of it because it's more of like a love story, and the boy is the one who dies. So, but like there are moments with Bronwyn and Marvy, her sister, and like they're talking about stuff that doesn't involve men, like cancer that Marvy has, and also just sister stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, the sister's a big character, isn't she? Actually,
Yeah.
a big supporting character. Because obviously you've got the 4 leads. Is it 4 leads? It's 4 leads, isn't it?
Yeah, and
2
then
boys,
one
2
of them
girls.
dies.
And one of them dies, of course. Spoilers. I mean, you all know the story of One of Us is Lying, I'm assuming. Yes, okay. But yeah, the sister is a very important character, isn't she?
Yeah,
I would
because
say.
like if she wasn't there, it would just be a bit boring.
It-
Because she's
well, it-
quite, she's quite big part of the story. Because she's kind of the backstory in the story. Like every
Yes.
single story has a backstory.
Of course, which is how they lead to the motives. She's an interesting character. She's got a kind of sarcastic kind of way about her, isn't she, the sister? So I think a lot of people like her for that reason.
Yeah.
And so for her to be ripping off, it's Bronwyn's sister, isn't it?
Yeah.
For her to be ripping off, and the things they talk about,
Yeah.
because obviously characters are very important, and she, to me, she's one of the better characters in the book.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think she's the main character in the sequel, isn't she?
Yeah, she is. She's the
I've
main
not read
character
it,
in
but
One of Us is Next.
Mhm.
Well, she's one of the main characters.
Clearly she was popular enough.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
There's an example, and you know. If I mean, we're not going to ask you to do this now, but if you can find a scene where it's just a conversation between the two of them and they're not mentioning boys, then it definitely. I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
I guess sister relationships would be quite big,
Yeah.
probably a lot of
And
books have
also
that
in
relationship.
this one.
Noughts and crosses. Okay.
Like,
So
it's the
you-
same thing with the sister relationships, and also like in the lunch hall as well, like at the place. There's not this one. I haven't read this one, and but in the lunch hall, there's quite a lot of like girls talking to girls about stuff, and she also talks to her sister a lot, and sometimes it's not to do with men or boys.
Mhm. It's just about general life. and-
Yeah.
I haven't
Okay.
read those books for so long. I need to reread them, I think.
It's another difficult one because Noughts and Crosses, the first one, it's all about the forbidden love, isn't it?
Yeah.
Between a nought and a cross, across the divide, and it's a boy and a girl. So you have to sort of dig it deep and
Yeah.
think of the subplots and Sephi. You know what is going on in Sephi's life. I suppose it's Sephi's relationship with her mother.
Yeah.
That's quite an interesting one as well. Because again, we all know the story of Noughts and Crosses, right? We're all familiar. Yes. So that's quite important for the story because obviously she's trying to discourage her from having this relationship with
Yeah.
Callum.
Mhm.
But they don't just talk about that; they talk about other things as well,
Mhm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Can you think of any?
Like the one where with her mum, she's talking about like going off to school and stuff, and like how she wants to go off to like a boarding school.
Yep.
And how like because that's nothing about Callum because Callum will still be going to the other school,
Yes, exactly. The
so
Nought school.
it's completely different, and like it's all about the boarding school as well.
And that's something you can all relate to. Maybe your parents have, your mums might have said, "Hey, you want to go to boarding school?" You ever had that conversation? Any of you? No. Okay, just wondering.
So yeah,
It's
Okay.
similar then, it was about general life, isn't
Yeah.
it? Just,
Yes.
yeah, context.
All right. Well done. Anne.
Thank you.
Good
See,
stuff.
they were good. You said they were.
Two
They
good
were
examples.
examples, weren't they?
Two good, well-known examples.
Do you want to do yours? Did you say? Yeah, just doesn't have to be long. Just a quick.
Well, like, I'm not sure if this is like 100% count, but I was thinking like Murder Most Unladylike. Because like the two main characters are Daisy and Hazel, and they're like best friends, and they solve murder mysteries. And I mean, you know, occasionally they talk about Daisy's father or brother or like Hazel's father, but for like most of the time, they're like talking to themselves about like, you know, best friend stuff, but then like most of the time they just like talk about their cases and like motives and suspects, so they don't really talk about like men or boys very much.
And if you think of the first book, because some of the sequels they go out to other places, don't they? But the first book's very much in the school. And there's that one male teacher.
And it's like an all-girls
school.
Boarding school.
So. So there's probably loads of conversations where there are no boys mentioned whatsoever. This is all about the...
And like, isn't it the headmistress? Has everyone read it?
I have read
it. Okay, so isn't it the headmistress that dies? Or is it...
No, the headmistress doesn't die.
It's the PE teacher,
It's Miss Bell.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, it happens very soon in the books. It's not too much of a spoiler.
Yeah, it's in like the 3rd chapter or something.
And you know there's got to be a murder.
It's going to happen to someone eventually. So
there's one example. Have you read all of them?
Yes.
So can you think of it from the sequels? Because obviously there's one where they go to Daisy's family's house.
Yeah, that's the second one.
That's the second
one.
So that, obviously, there's probably men featuring there. Can you think... There's the one that's on a train. So there's probably men in that. So can you think of any others where... Obviously, yes, there are boys and men in all of them, probably. But is there one where they're, like, almost in the margins and it's mostly about women and girls in any of the sequels that you can think of?
Well, the one where they like perform at the theatre, that's like there are a lot of scenes where they're just talking.
Death in the Spotlight.
Yeah, but then they do stay with Daisy's uncle, so.
But
like he's not
there much.
Yeah,
and that's only a
much.
setting, and when and he's not mentioned or.
Yeah.
Okay, so that looks like. I'm sure there's more. So there's
definitely more.
There's definitely more, but at least one of the sequels is a good example as well. Yeah. So there you go.
They go back to school at some point, don't they?
Yeah.
In one of the books, so probably that one too.
So look, the YA world is doing all right here. We got 3 very well-known YA examples where we can.
And it's reminded me actually of another example. The Josephine Tay, who I've spoken about before. She wrote a book called Miss Pym Disposes. Now, Miss Pym is a character who's written a very popular psychological book. It's never specified sort of what it's really about, but she's invited to give a talk to this very, very successful physical education college, which is just for women. This is set in the, I suppose, the 50s.
Okay.
50s, because Josephine Tay died in 1960s, and because all the staff are women and all the pupils are women, it's also a murder mystery. That's why I've thought of it. There is no conversation about men at all.
There we go.
So it's all about success, what you do afterwards, how they relate to each other, it's how the students are performing. We're going through a series of tests. They do exhibitions and things, and it's really quite interesting. Miss Pym sort of eventually solves this mystery by sort of paying attention and thinking about the girls and the young women, really. It's very interesting. But there might be a couple of men, but they're very much on the margins. They're not, part of the plot at all.
Okay. There we go. Good stuff.
It is this sort of academic institution, isn't it, in some ways?
Yeah. Kind of reminded me of The Little Princess as well. In that school, and
Oh, excuse me, I need to. What time's it close? 5 o'clock.
5.
Yeah. Is that all? Yeah. Okay. Unscripted interruption. So there you go.
Yeah.
So we're all having to work at this, but we're coming up with some good stuff here, aren't we? So well done, everyone.
Yeah, often you think of one and it kind of leads you to
Yes.
others, you know, you think of... I imagine a lot of ones set in girls' schools probably do pass.
Right.
Anyone else?
Josie, Hannah, can we think of any? You got one, Hannah? Brilliant. Come on over.
I don't have it with me.
That's okay.
I think like Miss Huntley's, it doesn't pass the reverse Bechdel test either. So
Okay.
like there's not any two like male characters that talk to each other. So it's called After Sappho, and I think it won. I can't remember if it was the Women's Prize or like it was longlisted. I can't remember if it was the Women's Prize or the Booker Prize. But yeah, in the last couple of years, and it's all about female relationships, artists, queer female artists mostly, how they inspire each other, and how like the relationships between them really are like necessary for them to help create their work. Like it takes a lot of influence from like Greek mythology, things like that. It's named after Sappho, who was like the most famous lesbian ever, pretty much. She lived on Lesbos, so it's like literally named after her. The relationships are romantic, but they're also like necessary for their artistic like growth. And these are all real women, by the way. So it's set from like the late 19th century into the earlier 20th century, and it features like Virginia Woolf, Lena Paletti, Natalie Barney, mostly in Paris, some in Rome. It's written in like fragments, just how Sappho's work is like discovered, which I thought was really cool. So I think it relates that way. Also, Girl, Woman, Other, I thought that was kind of similar. The way it's like told in this kind of fluid way, and it's mostly women, and their narratives kind of flow into each other, so they feel very much connected.
It's an extraordinary book, isn't it? Girl, Woman, Other.
I listened to it actually, but I heard there were no full stops in the actual thing.
All right, yeah, I can believe that.
Yeah, I think that's quite cool. And it's all about like the after Sappho fighting for women's rights, but it's amazing how like few men there can be in it without you noticing. I think that's it.
That's a great
That was really good. Yeah, excellent.
I'm not sure if I can think of a good example.
You've gone blank. I know it's hard
All
to
right.
think once you get.
Shall I go? And you can see if you can think of one or two. I'll do a couple as well, but I'll bet you
So
more time.
hard to think, isn't
It is very hard to think. As we proved with the intro.
Yeah.
Right, I've got two. I've got a YA one and an adult one. So first of all, has anyone heard of this one? One by Sarah Crossan, featuring conjoined twins. What are their names again? Grace and Tippy. Yes. Like all Sarah Crossan novels, written in verse. Sorry? It is very sad. It is very sad, but it is really good. It won the Carnegie Medal, what year was it? 2017, something like that. And yeah, it's just beautiful. It's very moving. And for those of you who don't know the story, they're conjoined twins, and it's about their story of being it's kind of like wondering away, integrated into mainstream education because they've been homeschooled before. And I'll just read. And yeah, just to hammer the point home, that is very much about these two conjoined twins and no one else. So yeah, written in verse. So, sisters, here we are, and we are living. Isn't that amazing? How we managed to be at all? Obviously, they're conjoined twins, so it's like the miracle of living together. And yeah, it sort of, if I remember correctly, it sort of alternates between the two. So I don't know who's speaking here, but the end of summer. Summer's breath begins to cool. The ink of night becomes earlier and earlier. And out of the blue, Mum announces that Tippy and I will no longer be taught at home. In September, you'll join a class of juniors and go to school like everyone else, she says. I don't make any ripples. I listen and nod and pull out a loose thread in my shirt until a button falls away. But Tippy doesn't stay silent. She detonates. Are you kidding me? Have you lost your minds? She shouts, then argues with Mum and Dad for hours. I listen and nod and bite at the skin around my fingernails until they start to bleed. So yeah, so it's very much about their experience, and because obviously they're conjoined twins, they're of one mind, and it's all about. So I don't know if I'm cheating by saying, it's a conversation between two people because they're conjoined twins, but They are two different people. So actually, how can I even say that? Yep.
So they're conjoined at like the hip, is what I would say. So like, have they got like two whole different brains and everything?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're two distinct people who are conjoined.
If you're conjoined, you can. I don't think you can only have one brain.
No, there are these conjoined people. No, not brains, like organs and stuff. There are these
Yeah.
people who have
Yes.
like two heads and just
Yeah.
like one.
I think everything can be conjoined except for the head. I think, right?
Yeah.
So I think these girls, isn't it?
like survive?
It's no, these are barely conjoined. They're
It's
like
difficult.
just a bit.
Yeah.
As the opening says, it's amazing that we are at all.
There has been a case where there were conjoined twins with at the head, but and very painful. This is a long time ago now, isn't it?
I know the one. Yeah.
Early 2010s.
Yeah. At least 10 years ago.
Did they live in India? The boys.
I can't remember.
They had to make a decision, didn't they, as to what they were going to do.
Can they just stay conjoined by the head?
How would you like walk?
Well, it's
Well, they couldn't walk. Is the answer.
You'd have to be cared for the rest of your life.
It's a lot of pressure on the body, isn't it,
Yeah.
to try and do that? Well, they talk about that in that book, don't they?
Yeah.
It was a
I
big
don't think so.
big issue in the press, and what could they do? And
Just a little sidebar about this.
yeah,
There was a series on. I can't remember the name of the guy who was a host of it, but what's her name? TV presenter. Not Holly Willoughby. Was it Holly? It was either Holly Willoughby or Anna Jameson. The children's TV presenter. Anna James. Anna something.
Is she the lady with the one that has one arm?
No, I know who you're thinking of, but she does children's TV. But it might be. My memory's very vague. Anyway, he was trying to enthuse teenagers to read, and he was not getting anywhere. He's not doing a very good job. So he brought in whoever it was, and she was trying to get them all to read this book. And she had a great idea of all of the kids who were reading this book to go around the day as conjoined. So they would all just like put on a jumper over and they would have to do everything together. And there's nothing like that to bring a book to life, because it's like, okay, you are literally, because we're saying how reading builds empathy, right? You're literally having to live their experience of being conjoined. And it was a big success. I just thought, you talking about that just for some reason triggered my memory of that. This was a few years ago. And but I'm not saying that we should all go around doing that to get an insight into this, because reading this is enough. As hopefully, you just from that little extract I read, the fact that one of them is quite docile and calm and placid, and then the other one detonates. So they're very different people.
It's a good word for it, definitely.
Yeah. Well, it's beautifully written, and Sarah Crossan's very good at that. So have you all read it then? You three?
I have.
Okay.
We should be conjoined at lunch.
If you want to be, I'm not going to stop you, but
I read why you were doing it.
I read it last summer.
last summer, did you like it?
Yeah.
Yes. So you recommend it, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good, and she's written a lot of good stuff, but that's the most obvious example, and passes the Bechdel. I had to remind myself the Bechdel test with flying colours. Now the next one is written by a man, Matt Haig, the great Matt Haig, Midnight Libraries. Anyone heard of this one? Yes.
Well, I know more about Matt Haig than the book.
What do you know about Matt Haig?
Well, he's written a lot.
He's written a lot of children's books. He has, yeah.
No, I know more about his story. So he didn't he try to kill himself?
Not quite. He considered it. He considered it. He
Yeah.
suffered with
And then
depression.
And then he wrote loads of books about it, but that one is about a girl, and she made loads of decisions in her life, and she regrets some of them.
Yep.
And then I don't know how, but she comes into this library, and every book tells her what would have happened if she made a different decision.
Yes.
Like, wasn't she a really big swimmer?
She could have been.
Yes.
That was one of the alternatives.
Like she
yeah.
she was quite good at swimming, but then she stopped it. And like, if she carried on with it, she could have been like an amazing swimmer. And all
Yes.
the
Yeah. Now you get it.
stories
Yeah.
and
Now you
all
get.
that.
It. That's it. That's essentially the premise.
Yeah.
Very well summed up. Very well summed up. Saves me the job of having to do it. But yeah, that's exactly it. And the reason this passes the test, well, first of all, obviously Nora. It's about her and the infinite possibilities in the form of a library, and we all have libraries, don't we? Yes, in the form of a library. But the main interaction within a Midnight Library is with the librarian, And the librarian is a woman, and the librarian is called Mrs. Elm. Mrs. Elm, because obviously, you know, librarians are all distinguished people, and you should definitely refer to them by with a sort of formal address. By the way, thanks to me being your librarian, we as a school failed the Bechdel test. Just put that as a man.
All right then.
Yeah, sorry about that, folks.
There we are. I'd rather have you than...
Then Mrs. Elm. What about Mrs. Elm?
Oh, I don't know. Mrs. Elm, I can't remember her very well.
Isn't she her school librarian or something?
Yeah,
She,
that's right. She is a school librarian come back to life because she's the one who she needs. And yeah, so obviously, so she's the main, she's like her spirit guide, or her guide, at least, you know,
That's right, yes.
along to help her access all these alternative possibilities. And of course, you know, yes, as you mentioned, you know, Matt Haig, he did suffer from, well, he still does, I'm sure, suffer from mental health issues, and as we all do, you know, the idea that we all have regrets in our life, or what if I had done this, what if I become a champion swimmer, what if I'd done this differently? So there's always infinite possibilities. Now, there is one that sticks in my head, you know, we're talking about the Bechdel test, so as well as lots of interactions, and it's just about her, with her school librarian, Mrs. Elm, there is one where a friend of hers, female friend, said, hey, come to Australia with me.
That's when I was.
Come to Australia with me, let's go around backpacking together. And that was one of Nora's lives that she didn't get to leave. And I'm sure men feature, but it's about those two and their friendship, because obviously there are subplots involving men too, and in fact there probably are more, but it just goes so that as a subplot, because it is Nora and her guide Mrs. Elm, so that is the most important relationship in the book, but there are other ones as well. So written by a man, a great recent example of someone that passed the Bechdel test. And look, Matt Haig's a great author as well. You know, if you haven't read any of his stuff, you really should, because he writes brilliantly for children and for adults. That being his most recent novel example. So there we go. Right, Josie, have you thought of something then? You're looking at the table. I don't know if you've read any of these, you know.
Have you read any of them? What's on the table? Yeah. Have you read The Light Tree?
I mean, you know, yeah, the Lie Tree is a good example. Anyone heard of this?
I've seen the trailer for the movie.
Oh yeah.
I've seen the trailer. Do you know what it's about?
Yes, I do. Okay.
So it's about this lady, and she, her mum is like in charge of the beauty pageant, and she's like a star and stuff. And then she's like a plus size person, and she wants to like protest, so she signs up for the pageant, and then like she needs help with it, because she wants people to help her so she can like win and stuff, because she wants to raise awareness and
Body positivity, isn't it?
yeah.
That's the central theme, yeah.
And then I've only watched the trailer for the movie, so I only
No, but you're
No,
right.
you
But,
wouldn't
yes,
know
yeah, but
that.
you summed it up well. Now, in the trailer, did you notice who might be a very important relationship of his in her having the courage to do all this? Or otherwise, if courage is the right word. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
well, I don't really know the person, but I've forgotten the person. But like, also she has conversations with her mum as
Yeah,
well.
that's
with her
who I'm
mum,
thinking
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
And
And
played by Jennifer Aniston, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
So,
But her friend is a big role model for her.
Oh,
oh, you
yeah.
were thinking of the friend?
Yeah, I
were
was
you?
thinking of the
I was
friend.
thinking
oh yeah,
Yeah.
the
when
friend.
I said or otherwise, that's why I said the mum.
Yeah.
Because the
Because
mum
she
isn't
has
a
her
great
best
influence.
friend, and they go through it all
Yeah.
together, and she helps her out. And
Yeah.
So, well, yeah.
You've seen it then, I take.
I have seen it.
well,
Yeah, it's really
well,
good.
You
I
know
need
better
to
than
read
me
it.
in that case.
I mean, there is a romance in it. There are boys in it. It's, you know, it's kind of a teen rom-com as much as anything. But most of the crux of it is her talking to other girls about being in the pageant and the kind of pageant world and a lot of female friendship and stuff.
Yeah, so the female friendship, so the positivity of female friendship, but then you got the negativity of the mum being who
Yeah,
she
so it's
is.
a different kind of... You should watch it, Annabelle, I think, the whole thing. I think you'll like it. It's really good.
And read the book. And there's a sequel put in.
Yeah. That's about boys, so it doesn't pass.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I ignore that one. Forget I said it. Scratch that from the
I mean, I
tape.
think it's still good, but I don't think it does.
Okay. Ready?
Got one?
You got one?
I think it would pass.
All right, come on in.
Okay.
Go on,
Go.
give it a
Have a
go.
think.
Let's give it a go.
Good for you, Josie.
Well, I was thinking of Little Women because you have the relationship between the four
Of
sisters.
course.
Yes, it does. It does.
It's literally cool.
And although there are quite a lot of conversations about boys throughout it, I would say there's lots of moments where there are just the sisters and their relationship together and going through this together, and I think it is a big part of the book about how the sisters and also their mother, how they all work together as a family, especially when like their father's ill, so he's not there, and so it is just women supporting each other.
Yeah, I can't believe no one else thought of that.
I know, it's such an obvious one.
I know.
Yes, the relationship with their mother is very important.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, Mommy's not there.
And the older woman, the neighbour.
Yeah.
What's her name?
There's Hannah, isn't there? Their cook.
It's quite a lot.
Guardian,
A lot,
basically. There's Aunt. Oh, what's her name? What's the Aunt March, isn't it?
I think that's
Yeah.
her name.
No, it's Aunt. It is Aunt March.
Yeah, it is.
Her
Yeah.
father's sister,
Yeah,
who's much richer, of course.
but they don't really speak about men at all when she. Her in birthday.
No, they have fabulous sort of times, don't they? There's a lot about self-esteem and clothes and, you know, presenting yourself when you've not got much money and
they're writing a book with the manuscript. And
absolutely. And the relationship between siblings and big ones, aren't there?
It doesn't always have to be a positive conversation. It's
No,
still,
no, of course not.
You know,
Of
it's
course
still
not. I mean, you know, all
still
sorts of
counts, doesn't
relationships, all sorts of relationships.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
Good one.
Good, that was a very good one.
Very good.
Perfect one to end on.
Yeah, I would say so, 'cause
Definitely.
the rest of us missed it.
So we've done pretty well, considering that it's quite challenging, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Yes, the Women's Prize long list is out.
Yes, it is.
So you can check that out. Any number of other things that are sort of challenging the zeitgeist as well. This weekend at the South Bank Centre there's Women of the World, with lots of workshops and things you can just turn up and participate in, not just for women but mostly for women, and there've been lots of things sort of around and about as well, and of course we're in Oscar season as well. Is it Oscars this weekend? Is it Oscars this weekend?
Yeah, it is soon, definitely.
Yeah, so lots of films on the TV adapted from novels. I came across Room with a View the other night, and Suffragette was back on.
There we go. Yeah.
There's been sort of a rush of those famous novels. So
Things a Bright Girl Can Do. Sally Nichols. There you go. There's
There
one.
you go.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So lots to explore for the Bechdel test. See if you can find when you pick up a book next. Does it pass that test?
Yes.
It's really good.
And with
So-
films and TV.
Yeah,
Yeah,
films and
yeah,
TV
yeah.
too.
Because that's
yeah.
what it was originally invented for, so yeah.
Yeah,
Do bear that in
absolutely.
mind too.
Yeah. Next week, fingers crossed,
Fingers crossed. It was supposed to be this week.
we have Mr. Metz. She will be talking about Emile Zola. And Michael Rosen, Michael Rosen, the poet and children's author. He has written extensively on Zola because he has French ancestry, and she'll be exploring Zola's French novels,
Great.
19th century French novels for us, as she's a great fan. So hopefully that'll be next week. So.
Yes.
Thanks for coming, everybody, and thanks for watching. I'm going to say hello to Mr. Conway
Hello, Mr. Conway.
and Mr. Sanders, and past pupils. They're much in my thoughts this week because of World Book Day as much as anything.
Yeah, let's not forget that.
And also congratulations to everyone on their fabulous costumes. I was
Yes.
looking again at the the photos.
Yeah, Miss Huntley wasn't here on a day.
Yeah,
sadly,
sorry, I
So
wasn't.
she had to watch from afar. But
I
yeah,
did
we
watch from afar.
We had a very good World Book Day.
Yeah,
So,
it looked really, really fun. So, okay. Thanks, everybody.
happy International Women's Day.
Happy International Women's Day, and as we brave the snow, not so much here now, but certainly up north, keep warm, everybody. Okay,
Right.
take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.